Elizabeth, and welcome to Sube la Vibra. Today we have our special guest, Neale Donald Walsch. Neale Donald Walsch, he is a bestseller author since 1997. Nowadays, he is in the list of the most popular spiritual leader of the entire planet. Thank you. Neale Donald Walsch is with us. Thank you, Neale. Hi, Neale. How are you? Welcome.
I'm wonderful.
Welcome
Thank
to
you.
Sube la Vibra.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much to you, Neale. It is a pleasure to have you here. Neale, in 1997, a good friend, Sonia, she gave me your first book, Conversation with God. And at that moment, it was for me very difficult to understand that we can have a direct conversation with God. How is that happen?
Well, first of all, it's important for everyone to know that all of us are having conversations with God all the time. There's no one way, there's no one process. I think that divinity, what I call God, lives within each one of us. It's the source of wisdom, the source of clarity, the source of understanding, and the source of unconditional love that exists and resides within all of us. That's number one. So when we talk about what is the process, it's different for everyone. For some people, they may hear a message in their mind. They may hear a voice outside of themselves, as I did at the very beginning. They may just simply see a sign on a billboard as they're driving down the road that is a direct answer to a question they've had in their mind. They may meet a friend on the street they haven't seen in many years, and there's just a chance coincidence that they meet this friend. And the friend might start discussing something they've been looking at. Or they could even just be listening to the radio and hear the lyrics of the next song that you hear on the radio. So God has made it clear that she talks to us all the time in many, many, many different ways, across many, many different moments, through our many, many different lifetimes. And there's no time when God is not talking to us because, as I said, that which we call God resides within each of us and is always with us. So it's not really a question of what is the process. It's a question of who's listening. Are we really listening to the messages we're receiving? Sometimes those messages come in the form of pictures, just images or thoughts that we might have in our mind. Even dreams can sometimes be conversations or messages with God. In my case, to answer your question directly, I received my communications, I had my conversations with God in the form of a dialogue that took place actually in writing. I began hearing God's messages. So I got on my yellow legal pad and began writing questions that I always wanted answered. And I received responses almost immediately. And so I took down the responses that I was receiving. You have to understand that I never thought for a minute that anyone would ever read this, that anyone would ever see this. It was a private process. I thought of it as kind of a process of journaling, like a diary that one would keep. But after a while, I was told in the dialogue, this will one day become a book. And I thought to myself, well, this is a good way to test it, because I knew that no one in the world was going to publish. No legitimate publisher was actually going to put a book out from a man who claimed to be talking to God. So I sent it to a handful of publishers, 4 or 5 publishers, just to see what would happen. And as it turned out, one of those publishers did decide to publish the manuscript, the handwritten notes, really, that I had taken over a period of many weeks. That publisher published the notes, and it, to the astonishment of many people, it sold over 1 million copies and wound up becoming a New York Times bestseller. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 137 weeks. Mm-hmm. It was almost more than 2 years, better than 2 years. Mm-hmm. So that's my story, and that's what happened in my own case. But that's not the only way that one may have their own conversation with God.
Neale, a few years ago, I read again the book. And for me, it was really easy to understand your message. And it was like I understood that we can have a conversation with God. Why does that happen to me?
Well, because you weren't ready.
Of course, but why?
That's a question that the answer is different for every person in the world. So there are 8 billion answers to that question.
Yes.
Why weren't you ready? There's not one answer fits all. I don't know why you weren't ready, but I do know that there are times in our lives when we are more open, perhaps, to receiving or accessing the wisdom that lies within us. And what causes us to be more open, I don't know. It's a person-to-person thing. It's an individual thing. I don't really know. I know in my own case what it was. I was simply desperate. I was very angry, very upset, very frustrated with life, and I didn't understand what it takes to make life work. And so I turned to God in my moment of anger and frustration. That was what made me more open.
Yes, for me it was difficult, a preconcept of how we have to connect with God. That is not a direct conversation, yeah?
Well, it's different for everyone. So everyone has their own story.
Yes, that is true. Can you tell us the most significant message that you received in the first book?
There were two, really. The most significant message was a single sentence. We are all one. Then God elaborated on that later in the dialogue. He said, there's only one thing. All things are one thing. There is only one thing. And all things are part of the one thing there is. So that idea of unification, the idea that everything is unified, that everything is an individual expression of the unified reality, was the very first message I received. And it was probably the single most significant message in the 3,000 pages of the Conversations with God dialogue. So what God said is, you are to me as a wave might be compared to the ocean. The wave is a part of the ocean, but it's an expression of the ocean. It arises from the ocean. It's not something that is other than the ocean. It's not separate from the ocean. It is simply the ocean individually expressed. And when the wave completes its expression, then it recedes back into the ocean, whence it came. So we see that, it was a wonderful analogy that God gave me. Think of yourself as a wave on the ocean of God. You're not separate from the ocean, but you are an individual and very powerful and very magnificent expression, individual expression of divinity itself. The second message that I received that was very important to me personally was God's answer when I asked, why isn't my life working? What does it take to make life work? And God said, Neale, it's really very simple. Your life is not about you. Your life is about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. When you understand that, you will be closer to a life that you've really been longing to live throughout all the years you've been on the earth. So I consider that to be the most important message for me as an individual. Your life is not about you. It's about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it.
That is wonderful.
Yeah, and ever since I took that advice, everything in my life has turned completely around.
This is similar to your first book, Conversation with God, yeah?
Yes. And the wonderful thing about the fourth book is that it gives us actual guidelines. Actually, I asked God, I was told that there are beings in the universe that are highly evolved or fully awakened. And I said, well, if that's true, what's the difference between a fully awakened being and human beings who may be living in an unawakened state? God said, I can give you a list of them. please do. So in fact, God gave me a list of
Wow.
16 differences between beings who are fully awakened and some humans who may not be fully awakened. So that list actually turns out to be a wonderful guideline that people can use in order to begin behaving, begin acting like highly evolved beings act in their own daily lives.
And can you tell me some of them?
Well, the first one is what I just said a minute ago about in the book. All highly evolved beings, all entities that are fully awakened, understand and embrace the fact that we are all one, that there is only one thing. And they live into that. That is, they construct their whole lives. They make all of their decisions, all of their choices, whether it's political or economic or social or spiritual or educational, any decision they make as a culture, as a group, as well as individuals, are made within the context of the oneness of all things, that all things are one thing. So they kind of, live in the old way that we used to hear the story of the Three Musketeers. It's a wonderful story. And the Three Musketeers used to say, all for one and one for all. But these days we live in a different kind of idea. We live in, every man for himself, and and to the victor go the spoils, and which is a very strange and difficult and challenging way for a society to construct itself. Yet that is largely how we have constructed our society. Another of the differences between highly evolved beings and human beings who are living in an unawakened state is that highly evolved beings tell the truth all the time about everything. Humans who are unawakened often do not tell the whole truth. Often they actually lie outright. And frequently, interestingly enough, they actually lie even to themselves. That is, they don't even tell themselves the truth. So we can tell that we're highly evolved when we begin telling the truth to everyone about everything. There's a third behavior of highly evolved beings that make them different from us. They share everything with everyone. They never fail to share. They don't share just with family members or people who are close to them. They share with everyone. Whatever they have is shared with anyone who needs something they may have. They don't give away every single thing they have. They make sure they have enough for themselves. They love themselves enough to make sure they have enough of what they need. But they share whatever they can spare with everyone, not just with friends or family, but with total strangers, anyone who needs help. And so those are some of the many ways. And there's a fourth way that intrigues me. A fourth difference between highly evolved beings and human beings is that highly evolved beings see what works. That is, they look to see what is effective in their life. And they do what works. They see what's true and they do what works. Human beings see what's true and they often do what does not work. For example, human beings see clearly that it's true that smoking is not good for your health, but they go ahead and do it anyway. They see that what's true is that putting small children in front of video games or movies or television programs where there's lots of violence does not work, because it gives children the impression that violence is the way that humanity solves its problems, which of course is true. It is how we solve our problems. But we don't want to teach, at least we don't want to teach our 4 and 6 and 8 and 10-year-olds such a terrible lesson. But we do it anyway. We let them watch video games, play video games where violence is what it's all about. Killing each other, and let them watch television programs and movies where there's violence all over the place. So we see what is true, but we don't do what works. In fact, we see what is true and we do the opposite often of what works. So those are 4 really important differences between beings that are highly evolved and human beings who are living in an unawakened state.
Oh, that's amazing. And what about love? So how can we work the love when the people feel so much hate inside?
We have to ignore any energy that we receive from others. I mean, if Jesus were here, or Buddha were here, or Muhammad, or Moses, or any of the great masters, Mother Mary, or any of the great masters, male and female, through the centuries, if they were here now talking to you, they would say something very simple. Love, love, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Do good to those who would do bad to you. And bless those who oppose you. So if we're going to be coming from a place of love, it has to be unconditional. Even when we receive less than loving energy from a source outside of ourselves. So, and it's possible, by the way, for people to do this. Not just saints like Jesus or Buddha, but actually ordinary everyday people. I think of Nelson Mandela, who was just an ordinary human being. And they threw him in jail for something like 23 years in South Africa. But he actually loved, he gave nothing but positive and loving energy to his jailers. So much so that when he was finally released after 23 years, his jailers wept because they felt they had lost their best friend. They had come to him for advice, for marriage advice, for a relationship, and for even occupational advice. They had come to him with their questions about life, and he would sit in his jail cell and offer them insight and advice. So it's quite remarkable what he showed us.
Yeah. So it's a way to see each other as part of us, no?
Yes, that's the whole point. There's only one of us.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, all the great masters have said in their own way, do unto others as you would have it done unto you. So that's very true.
Neale, would you like to give us a recommendation to achieve a better life?
I think when we talk about a better life, we have to define what we mean. The last thing I would say to the audience is that life is not about the exterior elements of your daily experience. It's not about the car you drive, the money that you earn, the house that you live in. Those are very nice things, and it's lovely to have those things. But in the end, the mission of the soul has nothing to do with any of those things. We are here on a journey that involves our interior life, not our exterior life. That the soul's purpose is to evolve, to experience itself in each golden moment of now, in the next grandest version of the greatest vision ever it held about who we are and who it is. And so the soul is on a journey of evolution. We are, of course, three-part beings made up of body, mind, and soul. And most people really don't think of themselves that way. They may have heard that somewhere theoretically, but as a practical matter, most people think of themselves as a mind and a body. And they don't pay nearly as much attention to their soul's journey as they might. When we begin to see that really we are on a journey of the soul and begin paying attention to the soul's agenda, I think the priorities that we establish in life tend to be quite different.
Yes. And so what do you think is a way to connect with the soul?
Through states of being. The bridge between the mind and the soul is to embrace and adopt a state of being. That is, to use the mind as a doorway to the soul. And how we do that is by, in my experience, by instructing the mind to simply adopt a state of being. I am being friendly. I am being compassionate. I am being loving. I am being forgiving. I am being understanding. I am being generous and kind. States of being, the highest state of being, of course, is love. So I am being loving would be the highest state of being. There's only really one higher, perhaps there's one more higher. I am being sacred. I am being divine. I am being holy. The great masters who have walked the planet have actually said that to themselves, maybe not out loud, but they have said it to themselves. And some have even said it out loud. I am sacred and holy. When we embrace that state of being, we open ourselves to the part of God that lives in us, which I call the soul.
That's great. That's all beautiful. Neale, where can we find you?
The internet at cwgconnect.com. That's how people can connect with me. cwgconnect.com.
Neale, thank you very much for your time, for your valuable message, because as you said, you are a messenger.
It was wonderful to be here. Thank you for asking me. You're welcome.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
Neale.
Goodbye.